Hi there, I'm Peter Millard, and in the 10-minute workshop this week I'm going to take a closer look at the Aldi plunge saw and compare it to my old Titan. That's coming up next. So the Tracksaw workshop series of videos came out last week, 100 minutes of video, 7 videos in total. If you haven't seen it, go and check it out. There's a link in the video description below to a playlist which keeps them all in order. I use the Aldi Workzone saw as a generic entry-level saw to set that up out of the box for the purposes of that video. I wanted to take a closer look at it. I wasn't planning on doing it just yet, but because of the timing of this, Aldi reducing the price of these saws in the stores just now, and that's usually a sure sign that they're coming to the end of their life. So a lot of people are going, oh, is it worth buying or not? Tell us. So I've brought this little comparison forward. And during the course of this video, I'm going to explain why my money would go into the Titan if I was in the market for an entry-level saw right now. These are both excellent saws for the money I would have killed for either of these when I was starting out 20 years ago at this price point. But obviously, there are differences between them, and that difference can make all the difference in the world as to which one you go for. Let me throw a few specs at you. These are both entry-level 1200 watt plunge saws, single speed motor, brushed motor, 5,500 RPM in the Aldi, 6,000 in the Titan. Entry-level saws, so no soft start, no brake on the motor. The Titan is heavier by half a kilo at 8.4 kilos versus 7.9. They both come with a 24 tooth blade, 160mm in the Aldi like the Festool, and 165mm in the Titan, which is like the DeWalt, the Makita and the Triton. Special features: the Titan has an anti-kickback built into it. I took that off within the first few days. I'm not a fan of that. It has a scoring cut facility, and there's a twist out anti-tipping thing that catches in the lip of the guide rails. The Aldi, the big selling point of this is the fact that it has a riving knife. It is the only entry-level plunge saw that has a riving knife, so if that's important to you, then this is the only game in town for you. It comes with an anti-tipping little sort of dingus in the box, but it's not a swing out thing. You actually have to attach it to the base, and it will only catch on the Aldi or the Shepak rails. Both saws come supplied with a pair of 700mm rails and a joining bar. Neither saws come with rail clamps. They are available from Shepak, but only in a pack with a rail stop and another anti-tipping thing. That costs a slightly steep 35 quid, considering you can get genuine Festool clamps for £21 a pair. So those are the saws. They're pretty similar in terms of spec, with a few minor differences. The Titan comes in at £110 and the Aldi at 80. Sometimes in store you can get this, I'm told, for 60, and somewhere in some stores down to 50. So why would you spend more on the Titan over the Aldi? Well, for me, it comes down to the out-of-the-box experience. How quickly can a new user get that saw up and running? And in my opinion, the Titan's a better bet. The blade is better. The guide rails are better, the splinter guards are better. The blade in the Titan is particularly good, I've got to say. I was surprised how well it cut when I used it in the Festool cheap tool Tracksaw comparison 18 months or so ago. Same blade, hasn't done much work since then because I don't use it much, but it's done a bit, and it's cutting extremely cleanly in my standard birch ply crosscut test. The Aldi, on the other hand, is going to take a lot more work, not least of which because the blade really isn't very good that comes with it, and the rails are problematic. This is going to descend into a few minutes of slightly nerdy guide rail talk, I'm afraid, but it is important because it underlines the real problems going forwards that the Aldi saw has if you were to buy that and then want to upgrade to something else. I'll show you what I mean. So these are the standard sort of Festool pattern rails. Festool patented this in 1980. It's out of patent now, and a lot of people use this sort of standard Festool style rail because it's very good. It has a single 16mm wide central rib that the saw runs on. Underneath that, you've got a T-slot for clamps. On the edge, you've got another T-slot, either for clamps or accessories. And because it's just a regular T-slot, you can make any old accessory you like. So, for example, a quick rail stop like this, easy to make from a couple of bits of MDF and a wing nut. The Titan follows the same pattern, but it has the Makita addition of this extra little lip over here, and that's for the anti-tipping thing. The Aldi rails, for some reason, and these are made by Shepak, and I don't know why they've done this, but they've got a T-slot underneath the rib, and they've got another T-slot on the end with a flat bar over it, so that you have a lip on either side. That makes it sort of incompatible with any other guide rail accessory from any other manufacturer. And it gets even worse because this central rib is 16.5mm. Now that's only 0.5mm difference, but the truth is, if you get your saw snugged up nice and tightly on the Aldi rail and put it onto a Festool rail, you're going to have 0.5mm either way, 1mm of play in that saw base on that rail. Plus, of course, when you join them together, you're going to get that train track. In fact, if you do join the Aldi tracks to any others, I'd recommend putting the Aldi tracks upstream, if you like, so that they're, as the saw goes over, the rib, the bar gets sort of narrower. I don't know why Aldi have done this, and it gets even worse because the rails themselves are slightly wider, they're slightly deeper, so the cut line is different from the rib to the cut line. So if you put a Festool saw on an Aldi rail, you'd actually cut into the rail. That's a real mess. I just can't imagine why somebody would design something like that. It just beggars belief, it really does. And unfortunately, we're not done with the guide rails yet. The Aldi guide rails have a splinter guard fitted that's incredibly thin. It's only 1.5mm thick, whereas most replacements are 2mm thick. 0.5mm, again, doesn't sound like much difference, but if you look underneath, there are little ribs in the aluminium rail that keep everything located. And if you put a straight edge against that, you can see that the splinter guard isn't actually touching the workpiece because the ribs are in the way. The splinter guard needs to be thicker. Now I've replaced these on one of the rails with a Makita splinter guard, and that works really well. That's 2mm thick, but it feels like it still isn't quite enough. I've got some ordered which is 2.5mm and some at 3mm, and we'll see if they make a difference. But again, this all falls to the out-of-the-box experience of the saw and what you need to do with it to actually get it up and cutting properly. So you might be wondering right now, well, what the big deal is here. You can buy the Aldi for 80 quid, you can change the blade in it for another 20 or 30, you can change the splinter guards for a tenner on the rails. What's you're still cheaper than the Titan saw. What's the big deal? Well, the big deal is, well, let me tell you a story. Let me paint you a picture. Sitting comfortably? Okay. Let's say you're Tracksaw curious. You've never had one. You've heard about them. You can see why they would be useful. But maybe you've got a job, a project coming up where they would be very useful. Maybe it's lining a shed with OSB. Maybe it's cutting cladding for a loft conversion or chipboard flooring, whatever it is. You go ahead and you buy a cheap entry-level Tracksaw. You find it's quite useful. The next thing you need to do is get another rail, because joining two 700s and a 1400 is a bit of a kludge. And then you realise actually if you had another 1400 rail to go to the 1400, then you've got all the bases covered pretty much. So now you've got two extra rails and the two rails that came with your saw, and you realise that actually the Tracksaw idea is pretty good. You're starting to want to do more accurate things with it, but the saw you've got you're getting tired of the noise it makes and the dust it generates and the fact that there's no soft start and it's heavy. So you think about upgrading the saw to something else, whether that's the Triton or the Makita or the DeWalt or the Festool or the Mafel. If you've bought Festool rails or Festool pattern rails, those rails can go with you because every plunge saw will work on Festool rails. If you've got the Aldi saw and you've bought Aldi rails, then they're kind of stuck with that saw. It's not an investment. You've just sunk money into that entry-level saw. Now, maybe that's fine, and maybe it's not. But if this little story strikes a chord with you, if you find it resonating with your sort of tool buying process, I think the Triton is a better bet, just because it gives you a degree of future-proofing, because it plays nicely with the Festool rails, and the Aldi plays with them. It really doesn't play nicely with them. Now, you might actually be thinking, well, that's okay. If I can pick up the Aldi saw for 60 or maybe even 50 quid, I can put the rails that come with it to one side. I can spend what I saved on a new Festool rail, and we're all good to go. You've got the Festool rail as a future-proofing investment. You've got the two Aldi rails if you really, really need them for shortcuts or whatever else. And you've got the saw with the riving knife. You know, what's not to like? Fair point. That's totally fine. All I will say, though, is that remember, the Aldi saw tracks wider. There's a bigger distance between the rib of the guide rail and the cut line. And just for fun, I've put a brand new splinter guard in this particular rail. It's snugged right up against the rib on the underside there. And the Aldi saw won't actually cut it. It needs to come out by another 3 or 4 mil before the Aldi will even trim that back. So you really need to replace that splinter guard straight away with something that's sort of 25 or even 30 mil in order for it to be trimmed with the Aldi saw. And if you've got 8 or 9 mil of splinter guard hanging off the end of the rail there, I'm not sure how effective that's going to be, because obviously you've got a saw blade whipping round at 6,000 RPM against a piece of rubber. It's bound to be starting to flat, to resonate a little bit, and then you just don't know how effective a guard against splinters that will be. But you know what, I'm going to leave it there. You guys do whatever you want. All I can do is give you the information that I've found from owning both of these saws and from using them both, and from using the Aldi in particular over the last sort of couple of months, 6 weeks or so. As I said at the top of the video, I would have killed for either of these saws at this price point when I was starting out. They are fantastic plunge saws with guide rails for the price of a tank of fuel. You can't really go wrong. And what I've just tried to do in this video is point out a few little details which might steer you one way or the other, depending on what your needs are now and what your future needs may be. But that's it for this video. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Take care.